If you're considering applying for asylum in the United States, then you need to see this because I'm going to tell you about 5 of the most common asylum application errors that I saw when I worked for the government as an asylum officer. Watch this video to avoid these 5 common pitfalls that can really hurt your asylum case. If we're just now meeting, I'm Brian Manning and I'm an asylum lawyer. I help people secure their future in America through political asylum. I worked for over a decade for the government's 2 main agencies for asylum and refugee matters, and as an asylum officer, I saw a lot of the same mistakes over and over again in the application materials that I reviewed. Now, understand that US asylum law is very complicated and getting asylum is difficult. And the last thing you want is for your case to be weakened by errors or other aspects of your application that don't sit well with the asylum officer. You want to use the application to set you up for success, such that the officer is inclined to grant you asylum before you ever walk into their office for the interview. And it's possible to do that with a carefully crafted application package. Here are 5 mistakes I constantly saw people make in their applications. I want to share them with you so that you can avoid these traps. All right, asylum application mistake number 1, being too vague. Listen, you're not expected to go into great detail in your responses to the questions in the application form, which is called Form I-589, by the way. It's common to give short responses and then supplement that to add to it with much greater detail in a personal statement that you can submit with the application. And of course, you'll speak at length about your situation during your actual interview. But that does not mean it's okay to give completely vague answers on the Form I-589 that leave the asylum officer scratching their head and wondering what on earth you're referring to. To illustrate this point, let's look at Part B, Question 1B on page 5. It asks whether you fear harm or mistreatment if you were to return to your country. So if you check the box for yes, well then the instructions ask you what harm or mistreatment you fear, who would do it to you, and why you believe you would be harmed. So they clearly want you to give something at least fairly concrete in your answer, right? Well, lots of people don't. They'll just say something like, I fear people from the government will hurt me. See my personal statement for details. Well, that statement, in my opinion, is too vague. It doesn't address what kind of harm the person fears. Is it a fear of being imprisoned, beaten up, possibly even being killed, or what? And it also doesn't explain very clearly who the asylum applicant fears will hurt them. It would be much better to be more specific about who within the government it is that you fear will harm you. For example, the police or army soldiers would be better than saying people from the government. Also, the example response I read to you, I fear people from the government will hurt me, see my personal statement for details. Well, it doesn't even attempt to address the why that the application asks you about. It doesn't explain why the person believes they would be harmed. Now, I do think you should answer most of these questions in not more than 2 or 3 sentences, but you can do that in a way that actually gives the asylum officer valuable information. So, for example, instead of the sample response I read to you, I would recommend something like this for this question. I fear local police officers will imprison me indefinitely because I do not support the government. I believe this because these police officers have threatened to do this to me, and they have 3 times detained me overnight at the police station after I held up anti-government signs at a protest. You see, that's short, it's just 2 sentences, but it gives meaningful information and it answers the question being asked. All right, asylum application mistake number 2, letting someone else do your application for you. I cannot tell you how many asylum applicants have had their cases ruined because they used a shady immigration preparer or notario to help them with their application. These people aren't qualified to help you with your asylum application. And big problems emerge when they either just mess up the application by making an error in it, or when they put something in it that isn't true. What do I mean by that? Well, here's an example. A lot of these form preparers are too lazy to carefully review the application before submitting it, and they'll send it in with information from one of their other clients' cases in it. For example, your application may indicate that you have siblings when in fact you don't. And that's a problem that will be discovered when the asylum officer reviews your application with you at your interview. Or commonly, a preparer will write an applicant's personal statement for them, which is submitted along with the application, and is meant to be kind of a summary of what all has happened to you, explaining why you fear going back to your country. But what happens is that these notarios and form preparers will either just make stuff up that's not true or will get details wrong. And this stuff gets exposed during your interview, and it can be a reason to deny your asylum claim. So please, if you're going to get help, go with a real licensed American lawyer. A lawyer shouldn't do your entire application for you. They should work with you to complete it. And you need to know every little thing that's in your application and all the supporting materials, and this is something that just doesn't happen when people use a so-called immigration consultant or preparer or notario. Moving on, we're at asylum application mistake number 3. The personal statement is way too long. I've referenced the personal statement several times already in this video. It's a very important part of the asylum application packet. It's your chance to tell your story to the asylum officer before your interview. It's your chance to nudge them toward granting you asylum, to predispose them to like you and to like your case. But the personal statements of so many applicants have the opposite effect because they're simply too long and rambling. They overwhelm the asylum officer, and actually, many asylum officers just completely ignore or maybe only halfway read a personal statement that's super long. Asylum officers are too busy. They've got an intense workload, and they don't have time to work through a 20-page, single-spaced personal statement where most of the content is entirely irrelevant to the actual asylum case. There's no quicker way to put an asylum officer in a bad mood and to get off on the wrong foot with them than by submitting a long, disjointed personal statement. So, how long is too long? Well, I'd say if you're going to do it single-spaced, don't go over 4 pages, really 3 is best, I would say. This should not be your life story, and it definitely should not be a treatise on how bad things are in your country. Rather, it should be about what specifically has happened to you or what it is about you that makes you think someone will hurt you. And I strongly recommend working with an asylum lawyer to make sure you get this right because it's critical to your case. All right, on to application mistake number 4, and that's lying. Don't lie, don't embellish, don't exaggerate. This will get you denied. I believe that honesty is the best policy in life in general, and I can tell you it definitely is in the asylum context. Your application materials should contain no statements or even hint about anything that isn't entirely true. And don't be misleading. I've seen lots and lots of people get denied because it was clear they were lying, or they presented things in a way that led the asylum officer to believe that they were trying to be evasive, trying to hide something. And what's really sad is that this happens to some people who would have gotten asylum based on the true facts of their case, but they just had to go and add a few things that weren't true because they thought it would make for a stronger case, and it ends up getting them denied. So don't lie. Last one, asylum application mistake number 5, it's not reading carefully and following exactly the instructions in the form. The instructions for the asylum application are long and detailed, and they can be pretty confusing. You've got to read them carefully and follow them exactly. Check out this little gem buried in page 5 of the instructions. It says, if any question does not apply to you or you do not know the information requested, answer none, not applicable, or unknown. That one sentence has led to tons of application forms getting rejected and sent back to the applicant, who has to fix the problem and submit the application again. This slows down your case and means more hassle for you. This happens because people, quite understandably, leave blank the questions that don't apply to them. For example, Part A2 of the application is where you put in information about your spouse and children. So if you're not married and don't have children, well, you'd think that you should just leave all this blank, right? Well, no. Owing to that instruction that I just read to you, you've got to go in and write the words none or not applicable in every single space where something can be written. It's an enormous waste of time and is, quite frankly, ridiculous. But you've got to do it or they'll reject your application. And you wouldn't know this if you didn't read all of the instructions very carefully. Or if you don't speak English, have someone explain them to you in detail in a language you understand. So you can see how easy it is to get tripped up by the instructions. All right, you can see that there's a lot of tricky aspects to presenting a winning asylum application. If you want help with yours, call my office and arrange the time to talk to me, or just reach out to me on social media. You can find me through my Facebook page, Manning Law Facebook, the Manning Asylum Law YouTube page. You can leave a comment and I'll respond to you. Reach out to me and we can set up a time to talk. We'll do an asylum strategy session where we'll talk about your case and I'll give you my thoughts on how strong your case is and we'll talk about your options. Thanks for watching this video, and it's my pleasure and an honor to serve you in your asylum journey.